As seen on the cover of the Boston Globe, the Reed case is the first off-world UFO case to be officially and formally inducted into the Massachusetts Historical Society. Everybody see the paper? Yeah? No? Okay. Our next speaker is an award-winning South Beach fashion photographer and is the founder of Miami Models. Some of his clients include Polo, Black Label, Tommy Hilfiger, and Ralph Lauren. What a fantastic life, wouldn't it be, right? Taking pictures of scantily clad, beautiful people in exotic locations. Well, his story is actually more fantastic than that lifestyle, if you can imagine that, okay? It is a story that involves numerous family members, his mother, grandmother, and 2 brothers. We ufologists would call this a CE4 case, close encounter of the 4th kind. That is direct contact with alien beings. Physical evidence has been presented in this case, multi-generational contacts with family members. It has all the earmarks of a fantastic case that all UFO researchers hope that they happen upon. Now that's how we would feel about it, all right? For our speaker, though, it is a deeply personal experience that few people in the world can truly understand and are willing to accept. Now, of course, that's not us. We're here to hear about this. Now, that being said, it has become one of the most recognized cases of all time. Several of his childhood sketches are displayed in the Roswell UFO Museum. The Reed family case would be mentioned at the United Nations, and like I said, recently was adopted by the Barrington, Sheffield, Massachusetts Historical Society. It would also be featured on the Discovery Channel, Alien Mysteries, Uncovering Aliens shows, Good Morning Canada, and in print, Fox Morning Show also, and then in print in the LA Times, Roswell Daily Record, the Berkshire Eagle, and Chicago Times. You will hear firsthand today about the extraordinary Reed family case because Tom Reed is here to share it with us. Now, before Tom comes up, we're going to, he has a...
It's one of the few CE4 cases to be mentioned within the walls of the United Nations. The evidence, radiation, magnetic fields, polygraph tests, and witnesses, all documented by those in law enforcement. Attorney Howard Reed was murdered on October the 2nd, the same day that their case was mentioned at the United Nations.
Is that me?
We were kind of drawn to the window, I guess, because she had just closed it, and in the distance, you could see this little ring of light with the whitewash, and then I felt inverted, and then I wasn't in the room anymore, and I know how that sounds, but that's what happened.
Hi, I'm Billy Baker for the Boston Globe, and I'm in Sheffield, Massachusetts, way out in the Berkshires, and behind me is the former Reed family farm. What's interesting about this case until now is that it's been very well investigated by people who are into UFOs, and this is one of the iconic encounters. Here's the modern twist. Very recently, the Gt Barrington Historical Society took a look at all the evidence in this case, and there's a boatload of evidence, and you can call it evidence, you can call it hearsay, whatever it is. They examined the things that are related to this event, and they came out and said, we believe that this is true.
And then comes the whole idea of, well, how does one, how do you source something like that? What am I going to look at for primary source documents to make sure it is true? We look at events that are significant and true to the history of Gt Barrington.
Was there a vote or something taken on whether or not to induct this?
Consensus.
Okay.
Consensus. There was a long discussion.
Okay.
I think the case for us really rested on the fact more the significance of what it means to the local history of Gt Barrington. And there's such a broad spectrum there.
A little creeped out.
becoming one of the first in the nation to induct a UFO case into its museum. It all stems from a claimed encounter in town back in 1969. News 10 ABC's Heather Kovar has the full story, including from the man who says he was the subject of that paranormal activity.
Just miles away, as a child, Thomas Reed says he saw something quite unusual in 1969. Other people made reports as well. That paper trail, along with other documents, are now being compiled right here. Articles, testimony, results of a lie detector test, and even a drawing by then Gt Barrington resident Tom Reed of what he saw.
This is hometown news, let's face it, and it's hometown history.
Deborah Opperman, director of the Gt Barrington Historical Society, has been compiling the records.
It was tangible. It was seen by others.
To that end date, 14 years later, his father lost his life, and that's when the media started picking up the story. He says it hasn't been easy talking about this, worried it would tarnish his dad's political reputation, but he says he thinks it's credible and an interesting addition to the Historical Society. And look for the exhibit to open in the fall of this year. In Gt Barrington, Heather Kovar, News 10 ABC.
I guess it was maybe about an hour after we got into bed and we were kind of goofing a little bit.
And what is that? I don't know.
Sitting there, we're watching the flashes of light, but they just begin to emit longer and become brighter. And then the light became so bright that it just almost went through the wall. It was just lighting up the whole room. The next thing I know, Tom's gone.
Tom! Tom!
And I shot down the hallway.
Tom!
There's that same sensation of just being pulled as from that point, our family had never been the same.
My mother, she wanted this perfect Norman Rockwell upbringing for our children. And this just stripped us of anything like that. And it devastated our family.
A family's alien encounter case drawing national attention. Thomas and Matt Reed say as young boys, they were taken from their home by odd-looking creatures. Matt now lives in Brownsburg and says he had another encounter in 2009. They're both here this morning to share their story. And I want to start with, I know there are a lot of people watching, they're going to say, what are you guys talking about? This is crazy. I know that you guys take it very seriously and you're offended when people say, don't take you seriously, right?
Well, I don't know if it's really that. I just think that you have to look at the facts, and the facts speak for themselves. I mean, there was radiation, there were magnetic fields. It was discussed at the United Nations in 1992. It's a credible family. My father was in politics. Senator Dodd was a backer of my father. This happened back in the 1960s.
The first time?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it was kind of historic in some respects, but it was kept quiet. And then in 2009, when Matthew was involved with this case here, it kind of fueled everything.
I dropped him off, and I pulled out of his driveway and turned left, and that's when I saw an orange ball. It shot south, and so I turned south, and it was maybe 50 feet, 75 feet. My vehicle started to shake and shudder, and I noticed that the gauges were just jumping to the left, to the right, and I remember feathering the throttle, thinking it was going to stall. And literally the next thing I remember is being in the motion of getting back into my vehicle, and I had no idea where I was. I noticed I had a little bit of blood here in my mustache portion of it. It was dried up and it was flaky. That's how I knew it was there. I had noticed I had 2 puncture wounds in my chest. After I sent those to my brother, he encouraged me to get a doctor to look at.
Dr. Mozilla? Hi, Maureen Ellsbury.
Glad to meet you.
You too.
Very good to see you, Doctor. Thank you for taking your time with us.
So you saw Matthew Reed after his incident, correct?
Yes. I'm really interested in your examination of Matthew and the holes that were found behind his ear and in his chest. What did you find? What do you think about that?
That what I saw was more linear and more consistent with an incision being made. In other words, there was a small evidence of something like a scalpel.
So this seemed to be, to you, more of a medical procedure?
It gave that look.
Dr. Mazzillo is unable to explain Matt's strange marks on his body.
The obvious question is why? Why this family? I know they've hinted maybe it's their blood type, but take us back to the documentation, the proof that they have, the evidence, because they took this in front of the United Nations, in fact. What is the document?
There's radiation in the car, there's magnetic field around the car that can't be accounted for, there's thousands of dollars worth of damage to his vehicle. And the last thing he remembers is seeing a bright light and being taken aboard a craft. So the evidence is there around the vehicle, around the car. There's evidence, physiological evidence.
Mr. Reed, Thomas, has retained our office for the purpose of looking at all the documentation and pulling it all together and seeing if we can get it before a judge, get it actually into a court system so that they can substantiate it, validate it, and prove to people that it is real, verify that it's real. Obviously, we haven't looked at everything. There is a lot of things that he has, a lot of documentation, a lot of paperwork, over 100 pages alone just with the United Nations documents, and that we want to look at and put together and then try to present it to a judge. Our feeling is, just with what we've seen, that this is a real thing, it's a real deal. These people have truly gone through something.
A couple of Sundays ago, Evan West, executive editor at Indianapolis Monthly Magazine, stopped by to talk about a story he wrote for the March issue titled Alienated, the detailed account of what he called Indiana's most famous extraterrestrial encounter. And the story is about Matthew Reed. His brother Tom had encounters when they were younger. In fact, the Reed brothers are thought to be some of the most famous reported extraterrestrial encounters of our time. Tom Reed now joins us. Was on his way to go do the interview with you. He was out in the middle of nowhere, and I believe he was on his way he was in Illinois, and he made a stop, and at the same time was checking his emails, looking for a Wi-Fi area, and when it finally popped up on his phone where he could receive this Wi-Fi, it came from, according to what it showed up on his phone, it was coming from the FBI, where he could pick up this Wi-Fi signal. And the Wi-Fi signal, he looked over, and there was a white van that was just in it. And again, your mind goes a lot of places, but Evan like at that moment, facts are facts, and Evan at that moment thought, oh, they're following me.
For people listening at home, and of course you told your story many, many times, people must think but it's complete. People think of this is the stuff of Hollywood. This is the stuff of movies. This doesn't happen to real people.
Well, it might happen more than people think, and just to comment, our case had radiation readings, magnetic fields that would spin a compass, multiple witnesses. We've taken lie detector tests. We've had doctor's reports. We have an attorney right now who's actually taking our information to a court to have it ruled on to be authenticated. If that happens, this case will probably be one of the first ever to have stood up in a court of law. There's that much evidence to it.
Now, do you remember administering the poly test to Mr. Thomas Reed? I do. What questions did you ask, if you can remember any, some specific, not all of them, just a couple?
Especially, was he lying to me about contact he had back in the 60s?
What were your findings?
He was telling the truth.
And with that, Tom Reed.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Well, that's going to be a hard act to follow. Okay, first I'd like to thank everyone at Ozark for making this possible and having me here this weekend. For me, it's a powerful and important and very significant conference for me, because it's the very first time that I'm going to be able to share with you what has happened with our case and the developments and the induction of our case being the very first in the United States, and what a tribute that really is to my father. For those of you who may know that he did pass on the same day that our case went before the United Nations in 1992 after talk of a book. So for me, it's a very emotional and it's a very meaningful and deep and powerful day for me to be able to share this with you. So I want to thank you for being here for me today. Now, I put together a PowerPoint that is considerably different than anything I've done before. It's going to really focus on the particulars, how it got inducted, who played a part in that, now why now, that whole thing. And I've set up enough slides here that if I have time, I can pretty much get into any other aspect of this and take some questions at the same time. But we're going to look at a lot of documents. And how many of you out there, while this is loading, have heard our case before? Quite a few. How many have not? All right, well, I got my homework, don't I? Yeah. Okay. Give this a second. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, because the audio can fluctuate a little bit. Okay. That's actually me on my horse back in the 1960s. What we're going to talk about today, I'm going to do this again. We're going to set this up a little differently. I'm going to talk about Great Barrington, Massachusetts, which I haven't spoken about before ever, really. I'm going to a little bit about the Village Green Restaurant, WSBS Radio, the role that they played in this, the Historical Society, and the United Nations, the radiation readings that were found, the magnetic fields, of course, the polygraph test, which you saw a little bit of that. The physical markings we actually had on our body, and of course our case being inducted in Roswell and how that piggybacked with the Historical Society, my father's run for office, and the witnesses that were involved in all this that came full circle and played a big part in this induction. Now this is actually the letter from the Historical Society. I'm not sure if you can read that or not. If you can't, I can blow it up a little bit, but can you read that, or should I read it for you? Or, okay. I'll run through it anyway. The Great Barrington Historical Society in Massachusetts has formally and officially inducted the very first off-world UFO case in the U.S. The subject encounter involves Thomas E. Reed, a Great Barrington resident, born on February 12, 1960, getting old, and his family. The event was broadcast on Great Barrington's own WSBS radio station, marking the incident which occurred on September 1st, 1969. This widely witnessed event was issued a Hynek classification, a UFO sighting categorization system developed by astronomer Hynek during the years of Project Blue Book, a study of unidentified flying objects conducted by the U.S. Air Force, and it was mentioned at the United Nations in 1992. Whereas this renowned case has received international recognition due to the factual and corroborated evidence, as well as a first-hand testimony, including a recent polygraph test, the Great Barrington Historical Society confirms that the Reed off-world encounter incident is historically significant and true and warrants induction into the Great Barrington Historical Collection. So for me, I think that speaks for all of us. And I'm very proud to have our family be part of that. So that's what this conference is going to be about for me today. To do so, and to validate some of what we were talking about, I was asked to take a polygraph exam, in which I passed with a 99.1%. WSBS Radio came into play as that station actually broadcast our case on September 1st. I shouldn't say our case, the sighting at the time, which was our case, September 1st, 1969, which was during the years of Project Blue Book. Now that does not mean it's a Project Blue Book case by any means, but it was issued a classification during those years. Now, before I get into this, I kind of want to give you a synopsis of what I'm going to go over. We had 3 accounts over a 5-year period. Some of these radio shows talk about 50 years of this and 50 years of that. Nothing could be further from the truth. We had 3 accounts in Sheffield, Mass. Over a 5-year period. The only one that was really witnessed by anyone was the one we're going to focus on today, which is the one that got inducted. Now, looking at this map right here, hopefully you can see my mouse, where we lived was right about here. Can you see that up there? Yeah. Okay. That is the highest elevation for 1,700 miles of road. Down below you had General Electric, Command Aerospace, Pratt & Whitney, and Electric Boat, which made nuclear submarines. So, and that's just not even going into New York. So we had the highest elevation, and we were surrounded by military manufacturing facilities, which comes into play later, I believe. Right here you see the height, 2830. Over in here it's actually closer to 3,000. And again, that's the station that called it in. This is a bird's eye view of our farm. You saw a little bit of it at the house. That's the house and how it was laid out, which plays a part because you can see behind our house, there isn't anything back there. It's just open fields. This is actually some closer areas of the home. This is where my brother and I were found in 1967. That's our stable. This area up in here is where it took place. And again, a shot of the house. And that's what it looks like today. Now, you saw a little clip with my brother discussing something. What I'd like to do, I'm going to play it again, his version of it, and then I'm going to tell you what I saw. Okay?
I guess it was maybe about an hour after we got into bed, and we were kind of goofing a little bit.
Stop it.
You feel that?
You do this every night. It's not funny anymore. Stop it.
Is it annoying you?
I remember seeing these flashes of light, and I was afraid of thunderstorms.
What was that? Come on, stop that.
I'm not doing anything.
And so I was getting a little bit nervous, but there wasn't any thunder.
Okay, I saw you that time. Stop it.
Me.
Then what is that?
I don't know.
Sitting there, we're watching the flashes of light, but they just begin to emit longer and become brighter. I remember that just being odd, thinking this is just going to be one big storm coming. And then the light became so bright that it just almost went through the wall. It was just lighting up the whole room. It was just terrifying at that age. The next thing I know, Tom's gone.
Okay. And contrary to what they showed you, he was not bouncing around. I was not kicking the bunk bed. Yeah. No, I wasn't. No. We actually went to bed. I went to bed early. I had to walk a half a mile to get to the bus. It was a long dirt road, so I actually had to turn in early with him. And of course, being in there together, we would talk. We were talking. We were in conversation, and this was actually the second time that we had felt something in our room, something that was very tingly. I've referenced before. You know when you go out on a full moon, you go out with your friends, you stay a little bit later, and you have that little extra energy. And I've referenced like 3 moons, because it gave you that pickup. There was no way we were going to sleep, but it wasn't an anxiety. It was just like a lift. And if you've ever been in the middle of a hurricane, the barometric change in pressure, where it's like a dead calm, picture that with a life to it and a tingle. And that's kind of what your body picked up on. That's what we felt. It was hard to describe before, but that's as close as I can to describing it. My mother came in, and doesn't tell you this either, to shut the window because she had seen lightning, what she thought was lightning from the other side of the house, and she thought it was going to rain. So she shut her window because we left the window open for a breeze because we didn't have air conditioning in 1966 or 67. And so she shut it and left. And at that moment, I was actually laying on the bunk bed, and I was kind of had my, the steps came down in front, and so I couldn't really see out the window, but I was drawn to the window. You just had, you're looking at the cracks in the door, what is this going on here? And so I looked off the side of the bed and I saw this little ring through the window that looked like a hula hoop. And I showed you the farm earlier. There's no house back there. There's a tree line and an open field. What could possibly be back there? So I was looking at that and then laying off the side, and we were talking in between that, and just the next thing I know, it felt like I got hit with an ocean wave. And I've also mentioned if you know, the bubble wrap that has air in it, if that was white, I felt like I just immediately got smacked with that, was wrapped with it, and then flipped upside down. So I would have been like inverted. I didn't go forward, I didn't go sideways, it was off to the side where my head was down. I felt completely upside down. If you've ever been caught up in, I use the ocean wave thing because if you've ever been caught up in the turbulence and you're tossed around a little bit and you're trying to get breath, you want to swim up, that's the closest thing that I could reference to tell you what that was like. And then it was over like that. And then I was at the top of my property. My brother did run to get my mother.
Tom! Tom!
And I shot down the hallway.
Tom!
And he was probably yelling something a little more colorful than Tom.
The banister.
But, so when he went to get my mother, they show him running to the stairs. He actually went into my mother's room. He tried to wake my grandmother. Now, my grandmother and my mother were sharing a room at the same time, the master, because we had family staying with us that took up a room, so they were in the same room. So he went in to wake them up. My grandmother, Marion, wouldn't wake. He went and got between the wall and my mother, tried to kick her with her feet, tried to wake her up. She wouldn't respond to anything. It was like everybody else was asleep. And then finally, my mother woke up after a few minutes and then went to the staircase with him,
There's that same
crossing
sensation
my
just being
bedroom
pulled.
where I would have been. And then my brother, there was a slamming of doors. They've worded like a ba-ba-boom, you know, like a bunch of doors slamming just off time. And then my mother realized Matthew was no longer standing beside her either. That's what happened in our house. There was no bed shaking and no, that is what happened. Now, we found ourselves actually at the top of our field, that is a shot of the field where this took place. It happened back around this corner. There it goes, right there. This road actually goes up and it turns this way. At the time it happened, it really wasn't that wide. And what I remember was a large boulder on the left, and then what looked like a tree, a wishbone tree that was either split from a lightning or something, but it's shaped like a wishbone. And I had walked past the wishbone. I was not alone. I was accompanied. There were others with me. I was first. My brother was behind me. It was almost like we were in this engaging, going along, cooperative mind frame, which I think was induced by ELF, which I'll talk about later, or something very similar to that. And we walked, and there was a craft that was down off a little bit of a hill, and when we first saw it, it looked like a huge pile of dirt, is what it looked like. It was dark, and as we got closer to it, it looked more like a turtle shell. It actually looked very much like this. And almost, oddly enough, it almost had a look that it was like alive, like a shell to something. So we referenced it as a turtle shell. I stood outside of it with my brother, and just like that, we were inside of it, and that is kind of what we saw before I got in. Very similar to what it looked like. There's that wishbone tree. So we would have walked by it, something like that. Now the light did not come out from lights underneath it that you saw. There was a bit of a glow, but there was enough that you could see it, but not enough that you would really know what it was at the time. You see that okay? Yeah. So this is kind of what it looked like when my brother and I were first welcome guests. He was standing next to me and to my left. So I would have come in here into that little box. My brother would have been standing right there, which would have been up in front of me a little bit, and he had something with him, like someone accommodating him or keeping him in check, but he looked like he was sleeping standing up. When I walked by him, he didn't even reference seeing me, although he remembered seeing me. So I passed him, I walked. This was more curved like a question mark, but it's a pretty good idea, and I was taken up to the top third of what would have been a donut, which would have been the top third of this. So if I came in here, I was taken like that up to this top part of the craft, if you can see that. I was paused at this part, which was much darker. I saw 2 stools, like 2 tables, a couple of different entities, and then there was a screen that projected that would look like a sneaker-shaped star formation, and then that flipped to a willow tree and some water, and it went from like 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock, and it was just the whole back of the thing just was like a huge plasma TV. I mean, it was that brilliant. But the tree was moving, lights were coming through it. It was absolutely captivating, but it took my mind off my brother. And then when I realized my brother was no longer behind me, he was in another room, and he had his tugboat, a little yellow and white tugboat. So he was removed. Now, I put this slide in because I think it references how the inside really looked as far as lighting. I wouldn't say the structure, but that's kind of what it looked like. And that's what it looked like for me to be standing there. The best that I could make out of it. The tree was not bent like that, but the tree was off to the left. There was a body of water and sky. It almost looked like a live feed or something recorded. It looked very much like the area we lived in, if that makes any sense. Now, this particular slide I put in here to give you kind of a feel as what it would be like to walk that. So hopefully it won't be jerky. So this is where I came in, and I was accompanied. We always had an entity or figure to our left, never the right. Even when he was on the wall, it was to his left. And this is very, very close. And then it would stop here. Now, this obviously is not really accurate. It's just the best that we could do. Now, this yellow right here would have been like a copper or gold. It was not shiny silver. These things were very brown and bronze looking, and so was this one. This I don't really know for sure. We just put that in. As far as the bend on this, my brother and I remember being able to see underneath it. We didn't want to make any suggestions other than what we think it would have made sense, but it did not look like it was a solid piece that we could see underneath it, so that we did it that way. And again, this is a better shot of what it would have looked like. Why a willow tree? I've been asking that question to myself for 40 or 50 years. I like willow trees, but willow trees are where aspirin comes from, if you know that or not. You know, so there are some health benefits to it, if that means anything at all. So we're going to jump ahead now to 1969, which is really what got us inducted. But at this point, that part of what I shared with you was what we first shared at our restaurant when people came in to eat. You know, little by little, we had the same people coming in, and we wanted to share what happened. You know, you're not going to believe this, and they didn't. And so suggestive, you know, you should have said, you are going to believe this. But they didn't. And my mother, at that point, was single, and she was running the restaurant with my grandmother, Marion. And the way she would word it, there was always that table of four who would come in and give her a hard time and block the front door and turn people away from eating there. And you know, we had bikes for the kids. It was right across the street from the school. So it's where all the kids used to come over for like 25-cent shakes and everything. And so they would leave their bikes in the back. And then, of course, you know, a bike would be missing. You know, that just really made it. it really made it tough. But in 1969, it kind of changed because so many other people became witness to it. And then it's, we believed you the whole time. Yeah, sure you did. Okay, so in 1969, I was leaving a 4-H horse show at Butternut Basin Ski Resort in Gt Barrington, which is now why Gt Barrington has inducted it, not Sheffield. So I left the horse show after getting a brown ribbon. My saddle slipped. I didn't do very well. A girl I had a crush on did much better than me. I think she got a green. So I had to leave immediately. And she took me to the Meadows for lunch, and they sold fireballs and candies. So my mother took me out for an ice cream, fireballs, candies. And being that it was Labor Day, my grandmother and my mother were both at the horse show with us, so our cook had locked up our restaurant. I'm telling you a lot of stuff here, and you're going, why? But it's all going to come full circle here in a minute. So after that, we went to the Village Green to cash out, get the money, make the night deposit box drop, and then head home, just make sure it was locked up. That is actually our restaurant, and it is still there to this day. As a matter of fact, you want to see something crazy? This building right here, that's the new visitor center. Can't imagine. This is the bridge where it actually happened, right next to that bridge. So we left the Village on the Green restaurant, heading back to the house. Labor Day, it was about 9, and we had just got past it, and this is what the area looks like before I get into it. You can see it's marshy, and but you don't see willow trees really, but it would make for willow trees. But it was the same type of image that water shot seemed to make me feel like I should be looking for something, but I've never found what I'm looking for in a relationship either, honestly. This is kind of hard for people to get past, you know. But that's for another lunch. So we turned around and started heading home, and I think this will give you a good idea of, you know, picture that bridge, and we're all heading home, and we had a station wagon, not this, but now keep in mind, my mother was driving. My grandmother was in the passenger seat. I was in the back seat behind my mother, my brother behind my grandmother, Marion. I was handing him a candy, a ball, or a fireball, and she turned around through the back to tell us, well, I think he's too young, he could choke on that. And when she did, she saw all these lights that were like behind a line of trees. You couldn't really make out what it was, but it was just a mass amount of lights. I mean, it was just crazy. She referenced it later on as looking like a flying strip mall. My mother seemed to think because we were, wouldn't that be different? So we were, imagine that one. Well, it was it was a strip mall. So we were heading down, and it just seemed to pace or follow us a little bit. But my mother thought, we're looking through the trees, you get the little light that looks like maybe that's it, but then the car came to a stop off the right side of the road. Now, she doesn't recall if she stopped it, it stopped itself. It was a long time ago, but she doesn't think she would have stopped it, it just would have kept going, but the car did come to a stop. When it did, the same thing that happened in '67. There was that electromagnetic feel, that calm, that still, that dead calm, that, I had my ears clogged flying in because I had a sinus cold. It sounded like that. You know what I mean? Where everything seems muffled and dead. And then there was this huge eruption of crickets. And then it was just like that. And then a door opened, and I was in this room that looked very much like a warehouse. Now, this room that I was in, and this is important because this does not seem to make sense if you look at the size of what this would have been. Okay, so at this point, There was a lot of talk in town already, a lot of military bases, no-fly zones, Nike missiles, you know, all that kind of stuff. And here I am in what looked like an airplane hangar. And I would, if this was a football field, I would have been at like the 5-yard line. And there were carts, metal carts. Like when you were in school, you put the projectors on them and you could, okay, they were metal rolling carts. And off to the left was just an open area about the size of a football field. I couldn't see much light at all. It was pretty much pitch dark. And then the light opened at this end of the, yeah, you can see that. Right in here, this opened up, however it did, I don't know, and an individual stepped in. And I was not in this calm, engaging type of feeling anymore. I was quite alert. And I was actually taken out. So I would have been standing right here. The carts, tables I have here. And I would have been taken out this door. Now picture this now. These walls were probably as tall as these. Maybe not quite, but pretty close. They were very, I was young, so everything seems taller, but they were at least 10 to 12 feet high. When I got down to this bend right here, and I remember this like it was yesterday, these walls made a 90. No curves, they were left and right. Then I was taken into this room, off to the right. So I came up, took a right, I'm going to say this right here, I must have walked maybe from here to where the wall was over there, and then about the same distance and into this room here. Now, when I came into this room, the room bowed inward like a coffee can would if you were on the outside of a coffee can. And there were 2 pockets, one to the left and one to the right. This room right here was probably 25% of one of these. I mean, it was only 15 by 15 or so. It was not a big room. The outside hallway really looked more like this. It looked like a circle with a Y connecting into the circle. I was brought in and I was sat on a table just like, it was low. I didn't jump up on it. It wasn't a big table. It was just something I sat on. And there were 2 entities that were facing this wall, which until only a year or 2 ago I could barely talk about because they looked like insects with human hands. Their heads looked like footballs, that shape, like an egg, and they were bronze or gold. Human characteristics, appeared intelligent. But if you've ever seen Uncanny Valley, where you have those humans that aren't really humans, but they're almost human, and then you have this creepy feel about them because they're communicating with you, but you know there's no life to them. It was something like that, very creepy. And one of them turned to me, and I jumped off this table, and I ran out to here. When I got onto this area, it was twice the size, this entire room. I didn't know where to go. I was 9 years old. I ran out, half naked. I heard voices. I thought maybe it was my mother. I was hoping it was my mother. You know, she said she was crying out for me, but I can't swear it was her. But I ran to those voices. And I was immediately taken back in. And this here obviously got offline, but I think this paints a very true image or depiction of what that room felt like. So I asked myself, I was looking in an airplane hangar, very industrial by design. This is a very good picture of where I was. So, where was I? And if I was a gambling man, I'd tell you it was an underground base somewhere, but I can't swear to that. So these figures were 4 to 6 feet in height. Their legs had purple, like rings around them, like wine. What I thought had elephant skin. This was the apparatus that came over me. It's a very, very good depiction of that. And of course, the walls seemed to put out their own light. They stood on 2 legs, not 4. And so I'm going to play now television
just
version
like an empty room, like an empty warehouse.
And I'm going to tell you what really happened.
I have never seen anything that resembles it. It had the head of an ant, roundish, egg-shaped head. It had a very long, thin neck, and it had like a teardrop body,
I was placed on this table. I heard voices, which I believe was probably my mother and my brother. My mother and my grandmother were frantic. And then what looked like a cage almost. Like a rounded edged cage, almost tubular, came down and kept me in place. I could see, actually, when my head was back, I could actually see underneath it, so it wasn't that tight on me.
So that was pretty close. This is actually what I drew at 9 years old. And I've had this forever. I don't know what this was, but can't make sense of that, but again, it was 9. This actually hung in my 4th grade classroom at Sheffield Center School in Sheffield, Massachusetts. And this is actually what we've spent an awful lot of money on to give you a better depiction of what we recall. And again, this is really very much what I experienced. And again, if you look at that, to me that doesn't look all that scientifically, by design. It looks a little more homemade. I did not have rocks put on me. I had what looked like raisin packets, large raisin packets that seemed to have some type of a back to it that would adhere it to your skin. And I had one placed on my leg, one on my side, and I had one on my face. And then I felt a tap to the head or two. I don't really remember exactly. But then I was basically brought back to that large room that looked like an airplane hangar. And then moments later, I found myself in a car. Now, this was a very tough moment for our family because they all experienced it. Now, my grandmother had now turned the car around and ran back to, remember I mentioned we wanted to get our money and make the night deposit box. Well, we did that because that's the only part of town, too, that had anyone there. There was no point in going back to our house. She was scared. She wanted to get some help, so we went back into town. Well, when she got into the town, before she opened up the door into the hardware store, Silks, she just was like walking aimlessly, is the way I've always worded it. And I went in behind her to grab her hand. She got caught up in some old bikes, and there was a baby carriage, or a stroller, and she was pushing that, and I was grabbing her hand to get her outside the building. I was the only other one that was awake at the time. And also, my mother was now no longer in the driver's seat. She was in the passenger seat. And so you got to ask yourself again, what really happened? This was a store that she had walked into, and again, it's still in town today. And that was very close to the carriage that she was pushing. Now, after that, we had a long ride home. It was very quiet. Again, we owned 80 acres, or just under 80 acres. 40 acres was eventually sold to a dentist in town, Dr. Richard Stevens, and then the 38 that went with the house were sold later. But here's where you get thinking again. My mother had never said that she saw that willow tree image. It was just my brother and I. But we had a watering hole out back of the house, and she ended up buying a willow tree and putting it right next to the water hole, and then changed our room, locked it off, and then gave us the master. And when we got up in the morning and opened up the blinds, there was the willow tree. Thanks. So why she felt to do that? So to give you an idea of what it was like for us, I slept with a fork after that. I would go to bed and I'd hide a fork under the blanket. And since my mother was single, she used to come in a second time after it was dark to bend over and give me a second kiss goodnight. And there was a documentary that did a little piece on it. Again, they show this in quite a barbaric way, but I'll tell you what really happened. But I did reach up, I lunged up, and I caught her in the eyebrow with a fork. So that, just to give you an idea what it felt. I mean, and I'm not trying to say that what really happened to us was meant for harm. I don't know. But I know that it bothered us to the point we had to move. We had to leave. It doesn't mean it was meant for that, or that we didn't misinterpret something. But that's a lot for a mother and a couple of kids to live through. This was the room that I actually painted or made that sketch of the insect. And that building, again, is now the library in town, who's also part of this induction. This was actually the sketch that I drew that hung in that classroom. That's also in Roswell today. These are my old teachers. They're on board. They remember everything. And this is the classroom. So that's where I went to school. And again, this is also what I drew, that I really haven't done anything with, but to me, they mean a lot. Still can't figure out what that little piece is coming off of what that was for, but okay. So this is how it got inducted. Almost everybody I've talked about to this point in the presentation still lives there. WSBS Radio is the station that broadcast our account in 1969. And they actually wrote this letter and they sent it to Roswell. They've had it for a while. And that has certainly helped. Our restaurant, that's a picture of it from about 3 months ago. It's all boarded up now. And this is actually a letter from my father, who had been in office for 2 terms. He ran the Democratic ticket with Senator Christopher Dodd. And now we're going to jump ahead again. So now my father is in office. My father actually was mayor. He ran the Democratic ticket. Robert Bletchman, who he runs into, was also a Democrat and also an attorney. So now they're both attorneys. This is what fueled our case in the 80s and really brought everything in that little town to light. Now, the letter on the left is Christopher Dodd. He supported my father. There's a proclamation in my father's honor. There's actually a local holiday dedicated to my father. And there's a bench in the city green dedicated to my father. Robert became very interested in our case because he used to work, unknown to us at the time, for the Center for UFO Studies. I ended up legally retaining him contractually, and he took an interest in our case, looked into some of the past, and about a year or 2 later said, I have something big coming up, and I'd like to be able to reference your case. My father wasn't really sure because he still had aspirations, but at the same time, it was the first time someone credible got behind our case and wanted to do something with, or at least voice it in some way. So he did. Now, this is an old MUFON journal from 1989. It shows where Robert Bletchman was on board. These are some of the documentations. You can't read it, but it talks about some of the things that were discussed. And Linda Morton Howe, sitting right here, she was actually there as well, as Bud Hopkins and some other very astute individuals who I have a lot of respect for. This is actually a write-up on it about the case being inducted, the Reed case. Bletchman discussed file at the United Nations, and it was a follow-up article by MUFON afterwards. Why? Because MUFON's public relations director was Robert Bletchman also. So our case ends up having a soft mention at the United Nations about the electromagnetic fields, the way it felt, that calm feeling, everything that we felt so strongly about. These are some of the things that were discussed there, just to give you an idea. Aliens from other solar system are a potential threat to us, as we are a potential threat to them. Missiles we're not able to fire. I mean, this is just a few of the things that my father had in his possession. So, looking at this scientifically, you'd have to say, okay, well, 6.6 hertz causes depression. 7.83 is a feel-good. 10 hertz is hypnotic state. That's according to Yale. Electromagnetic fields on the human body, well, it's been suggested that the magnetic fields might reduce levels of hormone, melatonin, modify brain waves, change in response, time, complex reasoning, changes in time perception. There is also some conflicting evidence about whether ELF can alter your DNA. This is a compass that was filmed from our vehicle. I did not film this. This was filmed by Debbie Jordan Cobble, who many of you may know. The book Intruders was written about her by Bud Hawkins.
Oops. When I get near the end, it starts to spin. There it goes. I'm down at the end of the vehicle.
Now that was from 2 feet away. Steve White, a 30-year police detective, an active cold case detective, also worked it and validated his findings. And again, I'm showing you all this documentation and evidence because this is what brought our case into the Historical Society. It wasn't a story, it was all the documentation that went behind it. Can you read that okay, or? In short, it is the opinion of this investigator based on the whole of evidence, extensive interviews with both brothers or witnesses, polygraph examination, ongoing incidents, and physical evidence collected and analyzed that the Reed family have and continue to have extraordinary encounters with an unknown powerful force. Now I got a little clip here again.
The evidence was pretty astounding compared to most cases.
But how to convince a skeptical world?
Tom Reed, he said that he was willing to take a polygraph. I thought it was a good way to verify that he was telling the truth.
I said, now you realize with all probability your client's going to fail. He said, well, maybe, we'll see. Was I skeptical? Yes.
I spent probably an hour and a half, I'd say, going over everything regarding our case, everything from 1966 to 2010. And he had a lot of questions, and a lot of were generic, and some were more specific. And at the end of the day, I passed with a 99.1% no deception indicated.
My conclusion was he was being truthful when he said he was not trying to mislead.
Okay, now back to some theories that I have. Let me ask you this, because I've wanted to do this for a while. How many of you are Rh negative or O negative or A negative? I just really want to take a good look today because, okay. Rh negative. Get them up. Okay. So about 20%, 25%? Huh? Probably 1 to 3%. In here? Yeah. That was it? Yeah. 1 to 3%? One more time. Yeah, not as many as I thought.
I have a question about Rh factor blood. Of those different blood types, which of those are considered Rh factor blood?
Every one of them was Rh negative.
But if you have like A negative, AB negative,
they're all Rh negative.
you might not have the Rh factor though.
Well, Rh negative, our family has nine members in our family that are Rh negative. That's a very high number. Yeah, exactly. You don't have any link to a monkey or there's no link to where you came from. There's no link. You're just, where'd we come from? So, with that said, being O negative, which I was, and being that O negative blood is the only universal donor for the United States government, and it was very much in use or in need in the 1960s during NAM. So that was something else my father would say to me. Okay, we're all, or most of us, are O negative, RH negative. We are at the highest elevation, 1,700 for 1,700 miles. We're surrounded by military bases, if you will, or those who work in conjunction to put together different helicopters or what have you, you know. There was a lot of military there. So I leaned towards the fact that I really do believe that there was something universal being done, something that was being extracted from us, something that was being replaced, something altering us. And we feel that, and I'm going to show this in the end, that my brother had wounds. I remember feeling like I had a bubbling acid or hot water being shoved through my body. And on top of that, this is actually my son. Now, you wouldn't know it if we stood next to each other. You'd think I had him over for a party or something because we had nothing alike. But this is a school records where he scored in the superior range. Way off of gifted. He was doing first grade college math in 5th grade. He beat an unbeaten chess pro while he was in elementary school. And he would eat and hang out in the backyard with a 270-pound tiger. I suggested the dog, but he's never listened to me. This actually is what comes out of his nose. Now, we took him to the hospital, and he has a hole in his cavity that goes right up through the brain. And this thing comes out, it's about the size, almost the size of a pencil. It's like a membrane. We put it in a plastic bag. He wouldn't stop bleeding. And it happens every now and then, maybe once or twice a year, for no reason. You would think it's no reason, but there has to be a reason. And doctors can't find out what it is, but it's very strange. And it will bleed badly. I mean, it'll bleed for 20 minutes or so. I have no idea what it is, but it hasn't happened in about 6 months. But next time, I did bring it to the to UT Medical Center, and when it was in a baggie, and it just dissolved into water. So now we're going to get into something else. My son called me up at 3 o'clock in the morning one day to say that he thought I was in danger, and he was staying at his girlfriend's about almost an hour away. I assured him I wasn't. I was fine. I'm going to bed. It's late. I'll talk to you tomorrow. And sure enough, he came anyway. And when he came around the corner to the front of my house, there was an SUV upside down with a body hanging out the sunroof. And it was on our property. And he felt so strongly about that he drove an hour at 3 o'clock in the morning to be at my house. There have been other things like that too, but I don't want to run out of time. So anyway, in short, I brought him into the Knoxville Hypnosis Center to see the director, Michael Buckner. Michael Buckner interviewed my son, and he was consistently able to tell me numbers that I wrote down on a piece of paper that he could not see. You also mentioned that he seems to be able to do some remote viewing, is what I referenced that as, and which he confirmed. It was our pleasure to interview your son. Now, take a look at this. This was, let me see if I got the one behind it. Yes, I do. Now, September 15th, he also interviewed my brother, looked at the wounds in his chest, met with me, put this out, and was going to speak at a MUFON conference in Nashville a couple of months later. He never made it. There's his obituary. He was strangled on November 12th. I'll go back again. September 15th, 2010. Signed, Michael Buckner, the director of the Knoxville Hypnosis Center. His obituary. Now, November 12th, 2010. Now, the wounds that my brother had on his chest were connected to a gland that works with the thymus T cells, the T cells for the thymus gland, which actually, they're dried up when you're younger, but that's where your immune, in some respects, stems from. And the wounds that he had which you can kind of see there. We're right over that gland. Now this is kind of small to read, but it's 1 centimeter, 5 centimeters on top basically, and it does say centimeter, to 1 centimeter. And this is actually a doctor's report on that. So what I'm trying to say is he really looked at our family's records in depth, found that my son did score higher than coincidental chance, and he's no longer here to tell it himself. Now this is my mother. A lot of people have asked, does my mother ever speak out? Very, very occasionally. This is one of the rare times she has, and I loaded it here for you.
So how do you feel looking back? I don't talk about it much, and I don't even like to talk about it, to be perfectly honest with you. But I've always felt that the experiences were mostly something from another aliens that were actually trying to communicate with us and learn something about us. It's frightening because of the way these experiences came about. But in actuality, I don't think it was meant for harm. I think it was more like a biological thing, or they wanted to see how we operated here, or something. Observing, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Yeah. Changed my beliefs because I believe that we're all part of a creation, and I think we're all part of a larger world. So the fact that I'm frightened was probably strangeness. They didn't hurt me physically, but I certainly knew that they were in control of me, and as I understand it from Thomas and Matthew, their experience is related to sort of the same thing. So they wanted to find out something, I think, actually, and maybe they did. It's odd that it follows our family. That's a very strange thing. But it has, and it's been going on and off since 1954, which is a lengthy time. I'm an old lady. Yeah. A very old lady, and I can remember it like it was yesterday. So.
Okay, here I'm pressed for time now. I'm going to move through this kind of quickly. And this is the darker side of what I want to share with you today, because again, it's all these documents that got this case inducted because of the paper trail, the witnesses, and I'll move quickly here. My father openly spoke about the events and what he wanted to talk about. Now this is actually, again, Linda was there, Friday the 2nd, October 2nd. This was a symposium, Extraterrestrial and Human Future. Again, Robert Blutchman, but he was not. Our case was not a front runner. It was just to be mentioned in support due to my father's political connections, or ties or affiliations. This is the death of my father, same day, October 2nd, 2006. And this is actually his medical record, which also shows October 2nd, 2006, 1:41 a.m. And you see cardiac shock and sepsis. Now, if you were to look at this whole record, you'd find out that they found a very deadly fungus that had taken over his body very quickly. The CDC actually came in and has closed the building. The building has been closed since the time of this report. They condemned the building. That is the bench now that sits in memory of my father. And why we speak about this. I'm not selling a book. You know, I am trying to pay tribute to show that my father did not die for nothing. And that's why I talk, that's why I'm here. And if anything that I can do helps you, helps anyone else with a struggle with something that you have, or a friend who's dealing with something, or you're torn about it, you're not sure, this is a real phenomenon. And I'm hoping that our case will help show that and make a difference. I may not be talking out next year, this may be the last time I'm here. But this is a real phenomenon. Don't question yourself about it. This is actually a letter from my attorney, Frank Kessler, who was taking our information to be ruled on by a circuit court judge to get a letter of authentication. She was actually run off the road. You saw a little bit of this earlier, but
Mr. Reed, Thomas, has retained our office for the purpose of looking at all the documentation and pulling it all together and seeing if we can get it before a judge, get it actually into a court system so that they can substantiate it, validate it, and prove to people that it is real, verify that it's real. Obviously, we haven't looked at everything. There is a lot of things that he has, a lot of documentation, a lot of paperwork, over 100 pages alone just with the United Nations documents, and that we want to look at and put together, take some time, some research, put it together, and then try to present it to a judge. Our feeling is, just with what we've seen, that this is a real thing, it's a real deal. These people have truly gone through something.
Sorry to run that twice, but I want you to see something. Shortly after that, she was run off the road on her way back from the city hall, getting her papers authenticated. This is actually her police report. The individual, I don't know if you read all this down here, the individual was a private investigator that had been hired and would not reveal his sources while he was basically told we were riding together, to see that we didn't make it there or what have you, or to give us a hard time, but he would not reveal who hired him to do that. However, he lived 2 miles up the road from me.
Is she okay?
Yeah, but she won't have anything to do with it though, but I don't blame her. But this colorful individual who came knocking on my door in Kmart manager pants looking like a vacuum salesman had glasses like from Poncherelli back in Chips, and knocked on my door, threw a badge in my face, had me swear to the Privacy Act of 1974, and who worked for Key Point Government Solutions, asked me lots of questions, and I promised never to talk about it. But just for today. It's a special day. All right, as far as what I feel took place, I really do believe that it was a combination of things. I think we were in probably just a rural area that was surrounded by a lot of those companies who had interest in the subject way back when. I think that there was something that was found or something that they were working on that we got caught up in the middle of. And maybe our blood type was a good platform for experimenting. I mean, we're working with lions and tigers and coming up with ligers and spiders and cows for spider silk. We're playing with DNA now, so this could have been something that we just fell into a long time ago. But my son does have an ability. If there's a flip side to this, a positive side to this, it's my son. And my son actually has addressed conferences before, and I'm hoping to get him out here with me again once in a while. He's in college, which he thinks is more important. But just kids. But hopefully he'll be back one day and say a few things, because he has had some experiences himself as well. The thing that I really wasn't in tune with, or what I really wasn't getting, was that I really did have some things that happened that were very painful to me. And so I was talking to Devon Smith, a dear friend of mine, and I remembered being strapped down to a chair of some sort and seeing nothing but what looked like clear curtains around me and being very much in pain. And I didn't know why or where that was. I couldn't connect it. So I did, agree to do some hypnosis with her if she came to my house, and she did. So I was pretty much locked into that one. But yeah. But anyway, pretty much in closing, this is something I think you should see.
And 0. Just keep describing what's happening. You're doing just fine. Just verbalize everything. Okay, Tom, tell me what's happening. You're doing fine. Tom, listen to my voice. Listen to my voice. I'm going to touch your shoulder, Tom. Listen to my voice. Listen to my voice. You're safe. You're safe. Just describe what's happening. Tell me what's happening. Tell me what's happening. Tell me what's happening. Tom, listen to my voice. Listen to my voice. Okay. Do you want to stop? Do you want to stop? Okay, do you want to stop, Tom? Okay, listen to my voice. Listen to me. Listen to me. Listen to my voice, Tom. I'm going to touch your hands. I'm going to touch your hands. You're going to be relaxed. Come here. You're going to be relaxed. This is me. This is me. This is me. I'm right here with you. I'm right here with you. Okay, okay. Take a deep breath. Take a deep breath. We're going to leave that for now. Okay, take a deep breath. Okay, close your eyes. Close your eyes. Close your eyes. I'm going to put my hand on your forehead. Close your eyes. Take a deep breath. Okay, we're going to leave that time for now. We're going to leave that time. Let's come back to the present time. How are you doing now?
I don't know, kind of like remembering a little bit.
You did very well. I mean, as far as letting yourself go, letting yourself relax, taking my suggestions. You did very well doing that for being your first session with me. Do you have any questions?
I was like looking, all I saw, I don't know if I was sitting or what, I just saw like a white opening. And I remember feeling like I was hooked up to something or something. And it was just, something was happening. I couldn't see what was happening, but I felt it. And all I saw was this open area, like I was alone. And I was, I don't know, I just thought my whole body was just like feeling this enormous amount of pain. And then,
So you felt you were hooked up to something?
Something like from behind me or something, because I just saw like all I remember was what I saw, but I didn't see anything but a white wash, like air.
So anyway, what I really experienced, I remember having my arms out and something being connected to my back, and it was almost like my hands went completely numb on both sides and then turned into filled with boiling hot water. And then it went right across my back, and I remember, screaming, and I remember saying, "Get away from me, get away from me," and that was really it. But it was that's certainly not something you want to share on Facebook, but it's. But that's what it was like. It was like I was just boiling from inside. And that's the only time I felt from any pain, really. Again, this letter from the Historical Society, in many ways for me, is really all I could have ever asked for. That we've been able to, at least in some small way, make a contribution and add to this phenomenon and add some of that respect that I think it so deserves. And to add to that, apparently next year they're going to actually have a festival during the formal induction on its anniversary on Labor Day. So, do I have time to take a couple of questions, or? Anybody have a question? Oh. You want me to go? No. Oh, okay. Something I said? Okay. Yeah, it's a lot to go through, so I thought.
Do you feel like this has continued in your family, yourself, your son, other family members?
That's a good question. And Alien Mysteries focused mostly on my brother's event in 2009, which I really didn't have much of a chance to talk about. Yes, I think in a small way, because my son is certainly demonstrating abilities that we don't have. I couldn't have given him that. I mean, my son's IQ is like 30 times higher than mine, and he's 6'1", and he's an athlete. You know, I'm a portly 5'6", but I wear the suit well. But his mom is only 5'2", and he's 6'1", blonde hair, hazel eyes, and Linda saw him yesterday, and some of the other people I've spoken to before have met him, and he doesn't really even look like me. So there's two things that could have happened there, right? So good question. Good question. No, he's my son. I've had him tested. Yeah. But there's things continuing to happen a little bit. He's actually one day woke up in the middle of the night and screamed and thought he saw what looked like a white sheet over his bed. And he's a very confident young man. He's not one to exaggerate or anything. And he was a high school quarterback, and he has spoken at Portland, Oregon at UFO Fest. So I'm hoping maybe one day he'll accompany me. Yes?
Well, my question kind of piggybacks off of that. Did I understand in your mother's clip that she said it had been going on since 1957?
54.
54?
The first time anything happened at all, my mother was in Moosehead Lake, Maine, with her brother Robert, and Robert's girlfriend Kip. And Robert was going up to look or speak with a dean of a college in Maine, and so they stayed at Gooseneck, Maine, and they were there that first night. My mother didn't really know Kip very well, so they walked around the lake and they found a spot to load boats, the little spot, the dock boats. And later on that night, when they went to bed, Kip was in one part of the cabin. My mother was off the kitchen. My grandmother was in the master, and Bob slept on the sofa because my grandmother didn't approve. And and so my mother woke up, I'm going to say 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and she saw some lights in the room, like arcing lights or something. She felt like she was confined to the inside of a mannequin, and she was trying to pull covers with her hands, and she could move her feet, but she really couldn't drag herself anywhere. And then she felt her lower pelvic area being manipulated. And then she remembers sitting up after an hour or two of that. And then it was daybreak, and she walked into the kitchen, and my grandmother was actually making pancakes, and saw that my mother was in need, is the way she worded it. Grabbed my mother, and she was kind of placid, didn't want to say anything. And then Kip walked by, and my grandmother asked Kip to care for my mother because she still had stuff on the stove, and Kip was in the same type of mood or funk my mother was. So they wouldn't stay in the cabin anymore. They went out and they tried to sleep on that little spot where they found the boats to dock. But then it got so cold, they finally came up on the outside of the porch and finally into the house. But that was the first time she experienced anything, but she really didn't know what it was. But now, looking back, she thinks that it probably happened with her, happened with the 2 boys. Our 2 boys seem to have some heightened abilities, which have been proven. And so we've got this biological link to it, tied in with electromagnetic energy. And anything other than that, I'd leave it to the professionals, but that's just what my personal take is on it. So, thanks. Okay, you're welcome.
Named Don Ware.
Hi.
I was the state director for MUFON for Florida in the mid-'80s.
Okay.
And one of our state sections director, I think she lived Tampa or somewhere south of Tampa, found that so many of the people that she was investigating that had been taken on board UFOs had Rh negative blood.
Yeah, Zimmer?
No, I think it was somebody north of Zimmer.
Okay.
She was in Miami, I think. But
okay, because I was talking with her back then.
She asked me to document whether or not the people we were investigating had Rh negative, and I passed that on to Walt Andrus. I don't think it ever got, to my knowledge, at least while I was in that position, it didn't get into the field investigator's manual. But yeah, there is a direct relationship between the hybridization program and Rh negative blood.
O negative is number one, I take it?
Well, yeah, their O negative is special, but any Rh negative
Right.
seemed to. So we were gathering data on that. I never got a report from MUFON on how that turned out in the end. I don't know whether they made one or not. The other question I had when the doctor was asked to speak at the MUFON conference, and he didn't make it, was he warned? Do you have any knowledge of if he was warned not to speak there?
No, I wouldn't. And actually, it was actually Murfreesboro was the town. It was, you know, Max Mitchell?
No.
Okay, he was going to speak at Max Mitchell's MUFON conference in Murfreesboro.
Okay.
And just, I was asked, was he here? And like, no, so I went.
That wasn't the international conference?
No, it was a small one.
Oh,
it was
okay.
only maybe 2 hours from his office.
Yeah, because I know a number of people who got into some really sensitive stuff, and they were asked to not do that. And those that followed their advice had no problems.
Right.
Even here at this conference, I've heard similar stories.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir.
I apologize, Tom. This question is not really for you, but it's in line with the gentleman. I wonder how many of you who raised your hand that you are Rh negative also have had an experience. I'd like to see those hands. Interesting.
Is it even medically?
Very interesting, thank you.
All those people with Rh in one family?
Yeah, you can only have Rh negative through your family. Rh negative is not the prominent gene. If you're Rh negative and your spouse is Rh positive, your child more than likely 80% of the time will have a positive blood type. So because I was O negative, I married my ex-wife, second ex-wife. You can see why, you know, Thanksgiving dinner. What do you want to talk about? So, thank you. I'll be here all week, right? Yeah, it's my ex-wife was AB negative, so now my son is A negative. My brother was A negative, married A negative. His son is A negative. So as long as you stay within the Rh negative, your child will be Rh negative. Maybe not A or AB, but it'll, one of them. So that's the only way I think you can really keep it going. And besides, the other thing too, that if you're what are you, by the way? O positive?
I'm O negative.
What are you?
I'm A positive.
You're A positive.
I'm mother-daughter.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. So if you're A positive and you or are O negative, either one, and you're having a child that is opposite of you, you have to get shots because your body wants to reject it as a foreign substance. So why would a human being want to reject another human being as a foreign entity?
I was told not to have more than 2 children, and I've had 3, and they're all okay.
Yeah.
And you've never got the shots, or have you?
What's your blood temperature run?
It runs a little low.
Yeah, mine's 97.1.
Mine is about like that.
Yeah. So there is something to it. I know my time's up, but anyway, hey guys, thanks so much. Until next time. Thank you.